we'll just let a few people roll in, and then we'll kick it off.
How many are in?
There's 8 people now,
Okay.
9, 10.
Oh,
Oh,
I
wait.
see. I see the number jumping.
Right, right. Yeah, the attendees. Yep, guys. So we'll not kick off the Q&A just yet. We'll give it a minute or two to see more people come in, and then if you want to submit your questions for Jacquire, there should be a box at the bottom of the Zoom window that says Q&A. You'll want to click on that and submit your question there. That's the best way, because if you submit your question in the chat, we might lose it and not be able to get to it. So sending your questions via the Q&A. My name's Chris. I'm part of the Recording Revolution team. I just help out with tech support. And we're so privileged to have Jacquire King here today. And he's going to answer all your questions. And thanks so much for showing up. We really appreciate it. Got 37, 38.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. Thanks for this, Chris, and everyone showing up.
Yeah. Cool. So if you guys can hear us, perhaps just drop a message in the chat, say you're here, and just tell us where you're tuning in from, what time it is, and how's your day going. Nice. Nashville. Cool. Danny's here from Nashville. Austin as well. Brenda's in LA. Good, you can hear us, Lloyd. Right? Wow, lots of people here. Nice. Even Oxfordshire in the UK. It's beautiful there. Fort Collins, Colorado, Michigan. It's great to have.
Pretty good variety.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And we're seeing your questions as well. So once again, I'll repeat what I said. So if you've got questions for Jacquire, the best thing to do is not to submit them in the chat, because there'll be a lot of people, there'll be lots of messages rolling through, so you might miss it. But send it in the Q&A, and we'll make sure to do our best to answer it live. So you guys have taken the time to show up, so we definitely want to get your questions answered. Right. Well, Cody's here from Salt Lake as well. Nice. People are rolling in. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, I think we can probably kick it off if you're ready to get going, Jacquire.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So we'll start with Jeremiah's question. So he's saying, what are some of the best practices for working with musicians remotely on projects?
That's a good question. I try to, well, I mean, I understand what I was going to say is I try to avoid it, but I also realize that where things are headed in the world, or where we've been, that it's kind of an unavoidable. I do use some remote work, but typically like programming or composition work that someone is sort of doing more on their own, where there's not so much back and forth. I'm guessing that this question is a little bit more about back and forth. Best practices. I mean, probably the number one concern, well, there's two concerns that I would have is, a technically satisfactory capture of whatever the recording is, and then just sort of the interaction part of it, because, creative environment, it's nice to be together for the dynamic of it. I would say the two things that I would ask for are a test recording before to evaluate if I had any comments about how something was being recorded, before we kind of formally got into the capture, and then just try to spend some time, if you can't be live during the session, maybe if somebody's doing something on their own spare time or at odd hours, it might not be possible, but definitely just have a good creative conversation on the front end, and sort of at the midpoint, before things are finalized, sort of get like a rough mix or a check-in example sent, and maybe that's part of the testing the recording quality, so that you can be sent the isolated track or tracks, and make sure that before everything's signed off on, that it's going to work for you. I think those are probably the two things that I would pay attention to. Making it more complicated by trying to do like share audio, and all that stuff, making it more technically challenging is probably not a great idea, because then it's might distract from the creativity. So just good communication, and then some sort of check-in points would be what I'd recommend.
Great. Now we've got another question from Chris, and he's saying, how much do you depend on plugins for phase alignment from tracks, drums especially, that you didn't record yourself? He's giving an example of like Sound Radix or the like.
I don't typically, I love a couple of the Sound Radix plugins for sure. They can be, there's some pretty deep stuff that they do. I personally am not a fan of, you know, time aligning drums. I think that it can be messy. The best thing to do is just to make sure that you have correct polarity. And if there is a track or a microphone that is causing problems, I typically just try to eliminate it. You know, sometimes a stereo pair of overheads is not a really good capture, so I'll just pick the better one of the two and use it as a mono overhead. Things I focus mostly on are the polarity, the agreement of the polarity, meaning that the acoustic energy that's being created at the source is all being sort of received by the microphones in the same sort of polarity. So that's a big thing. I don't particularly care for the thing where like room mics or overheads and stuff kind of get moved forward to be time aligned so that the transients line up. I think that it's two things. First being, that's not what recording sounds like. We are very used to great recordings with microphones placed at different distances, and it's the art of combining them and placing them that makes something sound like a record. We don't, you know, even our hearing in a space, we don't receive all the information at the same time. So, you know, frequencies arrive to us at different times. That's how our brain knows location and so forth. But I guess the second reason is if you're stacking up all the transients together, as opposed to it being sort of spread out in a more of a traditional recording way, then all your transients are hitting, you're placing the most energy at one particular time as opposed to it being a little spread out. And so that's going to really mess with your headroom. So I think that fewer microphones, better microphone placement is the key. And then if you're not able to do the recording yourself, just identify what parts of a drum capture are working well together and maybe which microphones are not serving you well. I don't often do stereo room mics either, because they're usually spread out, and then in a space they're not sort of speaking equally. So I'd rather just have a mono one and sort of place it somewhere interesting, not typically too far out in the stereo field, but just adding that depth. You know, like sometimes, like a lot of times I'll use the Glenn Johns method of drum miking overheads, and so you know there's a difference in the way those sound. And let's say the floor tom is going to be slightly more ambient for the hi-hat than the microphone that's over the snare drum. So I might take a room mic that is a little bit fuzzier for the hi-hat and put it on the opposite side of that floor tom overhead. So hopefully that makes sense. In terms of the Glenn Johns, hopefully many of you are familiar with that, but it is a pretty widely discussed topic online. There's many variations of it, so you can kind of do some research there.
Great. Yeah, we got a question from Brenda, and I'm assuming it's downtown LA. So she's asking, I'd love to know your thoughts on best practices for capturing sound on live bowed strings. So your favorite mics, placement, signal chain. Thanks.
Sorry, Chris. Live what strings?
So live bowed string instrument.
Oh,
so
live
I'm assuming
bowed
like
strings.
violin, viola, cello, the like.
Sure. Best practices for capturing. You know, with any instrument like strings or horns or you know, even acoustic guitar, anything like that, it's always best, you know, you got to be careful because like things like a trumpet or something is very loud, can hurt your hearing if you get too close to it in the wrong way. But you know, listening in front of the instrument to find out where it's projecting the most balanced texture that you're after. You know, with bowed instruments, I always try to use the top of the instrument as sort of like a plane of reference. So like with a violin or viola, it's kind of like this. So I'm trying to place the mic in front of it, to where the sound is projecting evenly from the instrument, not kind of off to the side or in front, because then you're gonna miss some of that bowed articulated sound. Cello or upright bass, it's like that plane is more like this, so you put a microphone in front of it. It's typically larger diaphragm microphones, condenser microphones, tube microphones with more detail and just a larger capsule to capture a bit more of the warmth, are microphones that I would gravitate towards. It's those types of instruments are also not something you would, especially like strings. You wouldn't want to, you don't typically put a lot of compression on them. I mean, you do a little bit maybe for like louder sections, just a little bit of peak control. But there's so much dynamic range with them. That's part of the beauty of the instrument. So you kind of want to leave that intact and just sort of find that, that sweet spot, if you will, of what you're trying to capture. Typically like over, you don't want to get too close, 2-3 feet is probably as close as you want to get. And then, depending on if you're miking an individual or an ensemble section, you might be needing to share a microphone between 2 players or a section. So, obviously you need to get a little bit further away so that you've got a more complete capture. Hopefully those things help. It's, Al Schmidt, we lost him not that long ago, but he was sort of he's kind of a legend for his orchestral recordings. And so maybe doing a little bit of research on him and his philosophies would be good to sort of look up and understand. It really is first and foremost about microphone choice and placement. You should be able to get away with a lot of different microphones. You don't necessarily have to use a large diaphragm, but concentrating on placement is the number one thing. And so hopefully some of that helps.
Great. Now, Dan's asking, at this stage in your career, do you prefer to mix your own work or not, if you have the choice?
That's a good question. In that it's a good question in that it really depends on a few circumstances. I've gone back and forth. I think I'm now more in a phase of where I want to mix the things that I'm working on. And let me just clarify it. When I don't choose to be the mixer, I don't think I'm the best mixer for something. It's maybe because I feel like some perspective of another, maybe I've spent a long time on a project, or I'm not the only producer. A lot of times I've been on projects where you have multiple producers, and it's kind of a good idea to send it all to one mixer so they can kind of bring all the different recordings and aesthetics together and kind of give it a thread. So those would be the reasons that I would choose someone else to mix for me. I've had the pleasure of working with many of the greats, my contemporaries. Sometimes it's come to me with that was the plan from the beginning, that it's like, we'd like you to produce and maybe Michael Brower to mix. Never offended by that. It just really depends, I guess, on how I personally feel is the best way to hand it off. I mean, sometimes I feel like that the vision of a recording, especially if the production is a little bit simpler, needs to be executed, because simpler often is harder to get right and to sort of create the full picture and the whole space. So it's just kind of situational. Some of it's just based on circumstance. Some of it's just my own intuition about what is going to be best for the outcome in the end.
Great. So now this is a question from Phil, and he's asking, hi Jacquire, how do you approach pre-production with an artist like Norah Jones compared to a band such as Kings of Leon?
Well, uh, with Nora, like an artist like Nora Jones, because typically you're assembling a studio band, um, there you're probably looking to hire studio musicians that they know how to show up and they're more prepared. They're used to the situation of kind of uh, hearing a song a time or two and getting to work and being confident in sort of their execution. That's sort of the skill set that they've developed. With bands, you're um, not that the musicianship is not of the same quality, but it's just a different sort of environment. And um, whereas a session musician is going to come in and it's not their composition, they're just contributing their performance and musical ideas to accompany the performance. With a band, you're dealing with compositions where everyone has had um, a more substantial role in terms of the foundational putting the song together. So they're just different types of interactions. With an artist like Nora, you need to spend more time just communicating with them and trying to figure out who the players are that you need to cast, what different places you might need to go, because you're going to have to, in communication with the artist, you're going to have to inform the players more about what they are needing to do. They're going to need a little bit more guidance in a different way than a band, where each individual is kind of bringing something to the table in a more foundational way. And sometimes you have to be a little bit more of a intermediate in their communication and getting things established. I typically don't spend time in pre-production with studio musicians. Your pre-production would be focused with the artist on song selection, arrangement, choices, addressing things like structure, so that when you go into the studio and you're engaging the session musicians, that you're more on the same page with the artist to sort of direct. Whereas when you do pre-production with a band, you're spending time with them to make sure that everybody kind of already has an idea for a part, and that it's working well together. Like the opinions and the way the conversation goes is entirely different in those two situations. So you just need to spend kind of different time with them. But in either case, I don't like to spend a lot of time doing pre-production, just in terms of, like, what I mean by that is, with a band, you should be able, of a record that's 10 or 12 songs, you should in 3-4 days be able to go through everything and make sure that you're to a place that you're ready to go into the studio, because things are going to change in the studio. I don't ever want to do something in pre-production to where it feels totally scripted and you've worked out every little detail, because in a way that's foolish. It's wasted energy to think that something isn't going to change in the studio. If you spend too much time in pre-production, you're going to take out some of the joy and mystery of discovery in the studio and the sort of the magic making. So that's just some of the things I sort of think about.
Great. Now, Danny is asking, you mentioned a virtual class back in 2020. Do you have any plans for that still, or even an in-person seminar?
Yes, I have. It's like sometimes, yes, I did mention that. I think that it is still potentially possible for the future. Things change for me. Things have changed in the world. It's the cost of things, cost of travel, the technical ramifications of stuff, but how I'm busy in other areas. I would like to, but it's hard, it's a delicate thing. I have to sort of put it out there to see, like, how many and who might be interested, to be able to gauge whether an idea is desirable. And then, but that doesn't mean necessarily that I will always see it through. Unfortunately, it's just the reality of things. I'd like to. I mean, I've been through the pandemic and the last couple of years. I have started developing other business ventures in the music business. I've started an artist management company. I'm primarily only doing recording projects that I'm more intimately involved in. I'm sort of starting to not do as much work for hire, you know. So my career trajectory is changing, my interests are changing, and I'm just I'm not sure of it. I mean, I fully intend, you know, that this course that you guys have signed up for, we've reopened, which I'm very grateful for everyone being here and for partaking in this. I trust that you will gain something of value from it, and you'll feel like it's money very well spent. And if not, you can get your money back. But we are planning to, you know, later this year, look at updating and revising this particular program, and just kind of go from there. I definitely have ideas for things I could do. I have been asked about doing some live seminars. I'm just not entirely sure how that picture is going to look for me at the end of the year or early next year. So thank you for asking, though. I'm glad to know that you're interested.
Great. So now there's a question from Lloyd, and he's asking, what's a good all-around compressor for overheads? So he's bought a Neve DPX and a Retro Stay Level,
Mhm.
but he'd like to have a good stereo or two compressors for overheads. And also, as a separate question, is how does the Singular Audio F48 compared to the Fleet 47? As he bought the Singular Audio when you demonstrated it in a Universal Audio demonstration, and he likes it.
Yeah, it's a great microphone, isn't it? For the money, you can't beat it. I mean, just in terms, I mean, you know, you're talking about a microphone that's under $1,000 versus a microphone that's almost $4,000. Uh, so you know, they're not exactly the same. I think that in certain situations, the Flea might slightly outperform the Singular Audio, uh, but um, that's, I mean, I think that really comes down to some sonic detail things. It's not that it's an inferior microphone. It's just that we always have to consider that the sound of a U47 is something that we've been hearing on recordings for a very long time. So not necessarily that it's technically better, but it's just maybe a little bit more familiar and pleasing. I have found with the Singular that with some brighter, more aggressive sources sonically, that it's maybe not as suitable in when something's really bright. But it is, you know, if we go back to the question about miking strings, that's going to be a really great mic for strings, because it has such you know, the detail in the top end is so kind of cool and forward feeling. I don't know what your budget is for a compressor, but oh, what's the, it's a Compex. It's a copy of a Compex. I think it's ADR. Um, I think it's about a $4,000 compressor, stereo compressor. It is magic on drums. And it's also killer on acoustic guitars. You know, it really truly is magic on drums. Now, can you afford to spend $4,000 on a stereo compressor for your drums? Yeah, maybe. I don't know. But let's see what else. You know, I mean, I think something else that, like an SSL style compressor, there's a lot of good ones out there. I personally have the Obsidian Dramatic Audio. I use it mostly as a mix bus compressor, but it does also make a very nice overhead compressor. So there's, because like the Compex, the Compex copy, I would never use on my mix bus. It's too aggressive, but it's a magical compressor for, like I said, I mean, I always use it now on my overheads. But you know, making a purchase like the Dramatic, you can get two uses out of it. You can while you're recording, you can use it for your drum overhead. Um, and then you can use it in mixing as your stereo bus compressor. So I think that answers the questions. Yeah.
Yep, that was great. What
Awesome.
was the previous drum compressor that you said before the SSL style compressor?
That's, I have to go over and look at it. Hold on a second.
Give us a second, guys.
It's analog. Oh shoot. It's ADR, and it's the F760X.
Great. Yep, we'll write that down as well in the recording.
Yeah.
So if you guys are wondering what it is, ADR
I don't know if you can see it.
F760X.
Yeah.
Yeah, we could hear you. No, so,
I bought it at Vintage King, so you can find it on there.
great.
If you if Compex, COMPEX, if you search that, you'll find the modern equivalent.
Amazing. So the next question from Austin is, why do you turn off true peak limiting in Pro L2?
I don't like the way it sounds.
Good answer.
And it's not a necessary function, and I don't like the way it sounds. It sort of it kind of sounds, I don't know, just like digital. And it kind of makes a grainy, unnecessary sound to me. So I mean, like that, you know, it's not going to hurt you to unless you're really slamming that thing and you're creating a lot of overs. You're not really in danger of anything, and especially if you're going to send it to a mastering engineer, they'll make sure that there's no funny business going on. Yeah, it's for the sonic reasons. It seems sonically unnecessary, and technically I can't tell that it's really keeping me from making any errors. So hopefully that helps. I think what's more important is that you turn the resolution, like the oversampling resolution, up on those plugins than the FabFilter plugins more than anything.
Great. Cool. The next question is from Joshua, and he's asking, if you were to re-record Tom Waits' album Alice today, only using U80 tools, what would be your go-to plugins for the vocal bus, guitars, bass, and drums?
Oh my gosh. Well, is it a mixing question or a recording question?
Yeah. I think it's more of a mixing question, because he's asking for what would the plugins be for the vocal bus, for the buses for like vocals, guitar, bass, and drums.
Okay.
So
Well, I use yeah. Okay. Well, I probably use the same equivalents that, you know, I mean, I do what I do now, and basically is like a modern version of what I was doing then. I like a distressor on the bass bus, like distressor on the drum bus. But those are go-to tools for me, just in terms of like where to start. Sometimes a 160 is better on the bass bus. You know, sometimes if we're just strictly talking universal audio, yeah, I pretty much stick with it. I mean, you can use a 160 on the drum bus too. It sort of depends on the attitude of the music, the genre of the music, and what you're trying to achieve with. But you can't go wrong with the distressor. And you know, Universal Audio got it right on the mix knob with distressors. So you don't have to create two parallel paths to have one with compression and one without. We used to have to do that a lot more before they started putting mix knobs in plugins. But not everybody does that well. I can tell you for sure that the mix knob on they figured it out. Universal Audio figured it out. It's great on all their plugins, really. I can't think of one that doesn't sort of measure up. Vocal bus, you know, I typically go through all the variations of the 1176 first for a vocal track. You know, sometimes the Blue Stripe's better. Sometimes the limited edition AE version that has the 2-to-1 ratio is better. Sometimes the Blackface, I think it's revision D, is the one, you know, and then there's the 176 and the 175B. The 175B rarely ever makes it into contention, just because it's just a little bit too dirty, and you know, those early compressors were made for like cutting vinyl and stuff, so they don't really react quite the way we want to have a compressor react to a vocal, because they're more suited those early designs are more suited to program material. A Fairchild would be a good one as well for a Tom Waits thing. An LA2A. Most of Tom's vocals were recorded with an LA2A, so probably don't want to repeat the same sort of, because those have fixed attack and release sort of parameters. You kind of want something that you can dial in a little bit more. That's one of the things I like about 1176 or that style compressor. And then if none of those sound good, you just kind of keep going down the line. Sometimes if there's a lot of character in a voice in a recording, the fab filter, what is it, the C2, whatever the fab filter compressor is, can be a good one. It's got a lot of different styles and parameters and colors that you can use. It's very transparent and very flexible. So that's like, if I want a great compressor that doesn't have a sound, then I'll kind of go to something like that. But I'm always looking for gear that kind of imparts a tone or a color. And then what I've been doing more recently, especially on Vocal Bus, is I'll do a little bit of EQ and compression on the track, and then I'll send it to a bus. And I've been using the Sheps Omni channel a lot for, now that's not a UA product, but it's such a killer tool, because you can turn up a little bit of preamp distortion or like input distortion, and kind of select if it's odd, even, or heavy harmonic content. The de-esser module has 2 de-essers, so you can focus in the 4 to 5K range with a dip, and then you can do a shelf up around 16 that catches the really high stuff that kind of flies by sometimes, and control it separately. And then a further stage of compression, you've got 3 styles of compression there with a VCA, a FET, and an opto. So you can really pick and choose, and it's got a great EQ. I love that any parameter on there, if you option click it, you can hear that band or that function in isolation. So yeah, I forget if there was more to the question, but I think that's pretty good. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, I think you covered it really, really well.
Thanks.
So the next question is from Aaron, and he's asking, in the recording drums module, you weren't concerned if the kick or snare tracks clipped occasionally in Pro Tools. I understand how the hot input signal hitting the front end of the preamp or compressor helps in creating that nice analog situation, but why not attenuate the output signal post preamp and compressor before hitting the converters into Pro Tools to avoid digital clipping?
Well, if it's clipping, a handful of times, my rule is kind of like, if it's not clipping more than like 5 or 6 times, then it's okay. Because sometimes you have to get into just managing the gain in a way that if you're trying to completely avoid that, it's like that you may not be getting the best sound through the analog gear. So if it just clips a couple times, that means it's just a couple few samples that may be over. No, we're not going to hear it. It's not going to hurt anything. And I'd rather just kind of keep the healthy overall level, as opposed to trying to, I think that's something that needs to be considered. It's even like, it kind of goes to the question of like, why am I not using the true peak stop limiting? We have to understand what is going on technically and what the implications are, and that we can feel informed about our decisions. Just because a button is there or a feature is there, or there's like a warning sign, doesn't mean that you have to avoid it, or do it a certain way. It's really up to you. You may not agree with me, and that's totally fine. There's 1,000 ways to do this. At the end of the day, if you get a great sound and you present a record that it moves people and they are engaged by it, and it makes, it speaks to them, that's all that really matters. That the technical part of it is necessary to understand, to be able to be a powerful creator in terms of using the studio as your tool. But don't be afraid of breaking the rules, but be aware, if you are going to break them, what it is that you're doing and what the implications are, and that you're okay with it. So it's just like, it's not really a problem. There's so much transient energy. I wouldn't want to try to over control it with a compressor or something and damage the sound, or not have overall what is a good gain structure. But there's nothing wrong with turning your output down a little bit more, so that you're not getting any clipping at all. It's, that's kind of, at that point, it's more of a personal choice. I don't think that anyone has, this has always been my policy. And I don't think anything has ever gone out in the world where somebody accused me of making a bad sound because they could tell something clipped a few times. But respect the question.
Great. So now John is asking, what processing, if any, can be used on drum loops? So I'm assuming in this case, he's got a drum loop in his mix production, and he's trying to figure out if there's stuff that can be added to help it fit into a mix better.
Sure. Yeah, that can be tricky. I mean, sometimes you're going to have to do multiple things. Sometimes a plugin like the Transient Designer can help you. Like if it's got too much ambience or too much tonal color in it, you can kind of turn the decay down a little bit, or if it doesn't have enough, you can kind of turn it up. You can reshape the transients. Maybe it's verging on a little over compressed, and it worked well for whatever the situation was when the sample was created. But in your current production, you're not getting enough articulation. You could kind of increase the transients with the Transient Designer. EQ obviously is going to be rarely with a loop are you going to add a lot of primary compression. I mean, you might do some parallel compression that kind of changes the color a little bit, but a loop that has multiple voices in it, like in the case of a drum loop, you've got kick, snare, hi-hat, let's say, hopefully there's a good relationship in there that made you pick it to begin with, and so you're not really going to want to compress it more. So EQ can be a friend. Now, sometimes it's also a good idea to copy it to multiple tracks and treat each track differently. So let's say in the case of a drum loop where the bottom end's working really well, but the snare drum and maybe some of the elements in the upper mid-range and the top end aren't kind of maybe you feel like you need to compress those. Well, put it on two different tracks, low pass it down to the first track, low pass it down to a place where you kind of leave all the low frequency stuff intact and it's working fine. And then at a similar crossover point, you high pass the other track. And then maybe you add compression to that secondary track to get that control. And then you kind of combining them again to be a whole sound. Those are the immediate things. I mean, also plug in like Vitamin can help because you can change the bands of accentuation and also like what frequencies you're kind of accentuating and turning up. And then also it has a width parameter for each of the bands. And so it can help to expand a stereo field or collapse it if it's too washy. I tend to like my drums and loops and that kind of stuff a little bit narrower than some of the other instrumentation, so that it kind of takes a little bit more focus and impact behind the vocal, and that it's leaving real estate on the edges for other instrumentation to kind of be have a little bit of their own space in the presentation. Hopefully there's a couple good answers in there.
Yeah, I think that was really good. Cool. So now we've got a longer question. This one's from Steve, and he's asking about vocals. So he's saying, I'm mixing vocals with 3 and 4 part harmonies. Mm-hmm. Each harmony has the original harmony and then 3 overdubs each on a different mic with different distances for more texture in that specific harmony. One of these is reamped to a speaker in a very live room, which is mic'd about 10 feet away with Polar 8 pattern to get room sound. And overall, he's got about 46 tracks of harmony overdubs. And he can think of 3 core methods for panning, but he's asking for help in terms of how to approach the panning, bussing, and processing of this many vocal overdubs with a bit of explanation on maybe the pros and cons of different ways. So.
Yeah. I typically, without hearing the record, it kind of sounds like it could be a little bit messy because if you've got the same interval being, like typically with background vocals, like each interval I will typically double, but I'll double it the same way. I won't change the miking technique or the microphone or the distance from the microphone, because you might get into because the spectral content of all these different things, they may not mix well together. They may, I don't, it's sort of hard to tell without hearing the recording, but um, uh, you may have to do some more aggressive EQ with these elements to kind of glue them together. So they're, when you have that many tracks of background vocals, it's probably also a good idea to like high pass them. You can do it individually. So if I were to high pass 46 vocal, like background vocal tracks, I'd probably individually high pass them somewhere around 30 to 50 cycles, just to kind of get rid of some of that low frequency sort of buildup of like almost DC type current, like sound waves that aren't moving very much, that kind of will hold the speaker in place. They're going to also make compression not behave well on the bus. If there's too much of that, it's going to eat up your headroom and it's going to sort of destroy the behavior of the compressor. Because you're going to get foot noise and you're going to get a lot of ambient buildup. But then on the bus, I would also high pass it again, but I would high pass it higher. I wouldn't individually take off too much. It's like I'm sort of describing a situation where you're taking small steps. So don't just like cut the tracks off at the knees, like, kind of tame it a little bit. And then on the bus, maybe have a high pass filter that's somewhere in, and this kind of depends on the production and how these vocals might fit into it. But a lot of times with background vocals, especially, you don't really need much information below 100 hertz. So you could roll off on the bus at like 90 or 100, kind of just to taste sort of what feels right. But I don't typically do too much individual EQ or beyond what I just described, or compression, unless there's a feature vocal that has a wide dynamic range that kind of feels like it needs to be reined in a little bit before it participates with the group. I try to just balance the background vocals into a bus. I'll get to the bus here in a second, but just try to find a blend that works in terms of panning with 46 tracks and 4 tracks per voice. I would guess that you might have 8 to 10 different sort of voicings within that. And I would try to group them together. So it's like, maybe you've got a male doing a mid interval. I'd kind of take those 4 tracks and kind of spread them out and pan them to one side. And maybe there's a female doing the same interval. I'd kind of do the same on the other side. And like lower intervals and voicings, I tend to, unless you want to do something specifically dramatic to really draw the attention to something unusual, I tend to do lower interval voices more towards the middle and sort of spread out from there. And then on a bus, I typically like to use like an LA2A style compressor. And, I will audition the different, the universal audio ones. Like, for instance, there's the silver, the gray, and there's 3 of them. But, sort of audition which ones of those sound the best. I also use tape emulation a lot on background vocal buses, just because, you will get a little bit of that gluing effect that you're not going to completely get with a compressor. And like the tape formula, also playing with a different tape formula and the way that it colors the blend can be useful. It sounds like you have a pretty complicated circumstance on your hand. And, I wish you luck there. Hopefully some of that helps. Don't feel like you have to use all of the voices, like if you got 4 tracks recorded in different perspectives, don't feel like you have to use them in equal measure. Maybe that reamped one with the ribbon mic, maybe you don't put that in that group. Maybe you pan it to the opposite side so that it has its own space and clarity, and is kind of helps the texture and dimension of where the primary voices are. But I guess what I'm saying is don't be afraid to lean on one of those tracks more than the other. You don't necessarily have to feel like you have to make them equal, and just kind of make an interesting blend. It kind of goes back to what I was saying before about picking drum mics. Simple is better sometimes, and you can use something in a very small measure to kind of just shift the perspective of a balance. It doesn't. It could be just barely be audible, but if you turn it off, it changes things. That's that type of influence. So I hope that helps.
That was a great answer. So now Danny is asking, you previously talked about using two mics on vocalist. So I believe the vocalist was Nora Jones. Can you explain more about that process?
Yeah, it was just a way to, like, the very, very different sounding microphones. When I use two microphones on a voice, it's for a very specific reason. In the case of Nora's voice capture, I was using a copper phone, which, because that is a very erratic frequency capture and dynamic capture, I was punishing it with compression so that it was a very compact kind of lo-fi sound, and then I could just blend it in sometimes. Sometimes I just use the second mic to feed effects only, and it's not part of the primary sound, but it will feed effects in a more interesting sort of different colored way than if I was sending to the reverb, say, from the primary microphone. That's mostly why I would use a second microphone on a vocalist as the microphone to send to effects, or just to have a slight shift in color. I'd rather, like on a voice like Nora Jones, you don't want to put up a 251 and capture her beautiful voice and distort that. If you want it to sound a little tougher, it's nice to have something that's completely separate that can be used or not used to do that, to lean on that, to lean into that sound a little bit, or a lot, and just make the primary vocal mic with the sort of the beautifully recorded capture, just, maybe it's the slight contributor. But yeah, I guess that's that answer.
That was good. So now Matthew's asking, if you've got a well-equipped room but with zero sound treatment, where would you start, and how would you know when you've treated the room as best as you can?
Well, I think I'm just trying to picture what the scenario might be. Well, the first thing I think is, like, well, if you've got a bunch of great gear, why didn't because this is something that kind of gets overlooked, like, and I'm not trying to pick on you, but why wasn't there budget made for sound treatment, or because a lot of things like headphone amps, cabling, wire, tech power, I think these are things that get overlooked, and I talk about this in the course a bit. These are things that get overlooked in budgeting when you're planning to have a studio. It doesn't really help you to spend a bunch of money on a bunch of like fancy gear if you can't, like, hook it up and understand what it is you're capturing properly. Some really simple things. It's like, it's good to have a couch, carpet on the floor. Maybe you don't want it underneath your roll around chair, but on the floor, curtains, bookshelves. These are types of things that are just kind of common in a home, that you can sort of look to utilize. Also positioning. You don't want to set up your monitoring right in the middle of the room. You kind of want to be to one end of it. If you can work, my control room is very square, unfortunately, and I probably had to use a little bit extra sound treatment in here, but I also have there's a cloud over my head to kind of get rid of the reflections off the ceiling that would bounce between the floor and the ceiling. In the back of the room, you can see there's like a razor blade type of diffuser. There's certainly products out there that you can buy, some of it pretty affordably. Prime Acoustic makes some very good prepackaged systems that will do quite a lot very simply in just a standard room. But I can tell when a room is good because you walk in there and it just feels calmer. So it's just like, if you can walk into a space and have a conversation where, someone is maybe sitting across the room and they sound very localized to where they are. You don't have to speak loudly. It just feels calm, sort of calm, not dead, but there's definitely sort of a settled feeling. I think those are things to consider, and you just have to, no space is perfect. So no space is perfect to listen in. So a good set of speakers should be everyone's first priority. Not a microphone, because there's tons of different microphones, and you're going to use different microphones in different situations. Going studio to studio, you may only own one or two yourself, but having a pair of speakers that you get familiar with and you understand and that you can travel with is of the utmost importance, because you can listen to a familiar set of speakers in a not great space or a not familiar space and still kind of get through mostly unharmed. So hopefully some of those things help.
That was great. So now I've got a question from Devin, and he's saying, my friend and I are making an album. We're still in the writing and pre-production phase. She's chronically ill, so she's often quite sick. So what are some things that I can do to keep the project moving forward when she can't come to my studio to record or write?
Well, I guess I need to ask a question of this person. Are you doing some of the musical performance contributions?
Well, let's see if Devin, if you're there, can you write the response in the chat?
So, yeah. So, without knowing, so oh yes, he says yes. Thanks for the answer, Devin. Yeah, I think, just trying to, I'm sorry about your friend being so ill. That's certainly a bummer, but I'm sure that this process is giving them a sense of hope and purpose, which is very nice. So, whatever you can do to sort of just kind of keep the conversation going, like if you can be thinking about supplying rough mixes, maybe not all at once, maybe, kind of spacing things out so that it feels like there's something to look forward to. If you could add some of your contributions, as a musician to it, and share those things, just kind of keep the communication going, and kind of keep it alive, nurture it. Maybe there's not a lot that you can do like actively, but I think continuing to encourage and share vision will hopefully help them heal and get them back to the process soon. And then, yeah, I don't know. That's an interesting question. I mean, maybe talking about writing more songs as opposed to focusing on the ones that, like, if it's not possible to work on the ones that are started, maybe it's just conversations about what other songs could be created, or yeah, I think conversation and kind of keeping things vital and active, it'd probably be the most important thing. I think that's a thing that gets, I think communication and the relationship part, and I'm not saying you're not doing this, it just makes me think of what I think gets overlooked a little bit at times, especially as people are starting out, and not as familiar with the process, and being with people. I think what gets overlooked is, as many of you you're here because you're wanting to learn and expand your skill set, and while that is vitally important to become more powerful and be able to execute creativity, I think it's not all about the technical stuff. At the end of the day, what's most important is the communication, creating an environment that is comfortable to create in, and sort of being on the same page about creativity, being technically prepared when a session starts so that you can move at the speed of creativity. I talk a lot about preparedness in the course, and it will make your day go a lot smoother, and it'll just make things flow. So I think communication, and the journey that we take together is part of what doesn't get considered enough. The planning, the preparation, being observant in the moment of how people are feeling, and like who's doing well and maybe who's not doing well, and making sure that that the whole thing is kind of moving as a unit. And sometimes you have to slow somebody down so you can help somebody catch up. It really is, at the end of the day, it really is more of a people communication job, because I mean, I know we're all focused on the technical aspects of how to make a great sounding record. And while that is vitally important, the communication and the understanding and the interactive and being present is how you use the technology to capture stuff. So I hope that helps, and I hope your friend feels better soon.
Great. So the next question is from Estroberto. I hope I'm saying that right. He's asking, what are your thoughts on using electric drum kits for recording drums for rock? So I'm assuming that he's talking about like an electronic drum kit that maybe has a 2-track, or it's sending signals to MIDI, so it's sample based.
Super cool. I mean, I think it's super cool. You don't necessarily, it doesn't have to be an acoustic kit. A lot of great music gets recorded that way. I have an electronic drum kit that gets used here sometimes. I know that there's certain styles of, I think in country music, I mean, I don't really do any of that. But I have observed where, people, session drummers have curated their own samples of their drums or collection of things, and they play an electronic drum kit live as a performance with their curated samples. I think it's super cool. I mean, it's very difficult to get a recorded performance of an acoustic drum kit to sound to measure up to what the sort of sonic standard has become for a lot of types of music, because there's so much sampling and that's going on, and there's so much music that's being made with drum programming, or these generated sound packs, so go for it. If it feels good, it is good. If it sounds good, feels good, that makes it good. That's all there is to it, I think. So yeah, you should go boldly. That's my advice.
That's great. So now Tyler's asking, I'm tracking guitar with stereo pencil mics on the 12th fret and a condenser. It's a Soyuz 017 tube near the body. I'm relatively new to this. I think in terms of this, he means like recording and mixing, and you can hear changes with placement, but not what he'd call improvement. So what's your ideal mic acoustic sound like in your head?
Well, I typically like, unless the recording really is meant to be, I'm sorry, Chris, did he say solo acoustic? Is it solo acoustic?
I think this is a solo acoustic.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so yeah, I mean, I think multiple miking in a solo acoustic presentation is probably the right call, just because you're trying to cover a little bit. You're trying to create a stereo field, or a wider field of presentation for the acoustic. Yeah, a smaller condenser mic, smaller diaphragm condenser mic around the 12th fret, or where the neck meets the body, is kind of like a good location. And then something, a larger diaphragm over near where the strumming hand is, kind of over here, is kind of a good thing. You want to try to keep them equal distance from the instrument. And you definitely want them to sort of be angled in towards the sound hole, so that they're kind of collectively, they're sharing some capture. Let's see, I'm trying to think. I mean, it sounds like you're on the right track, and I don't know how to say something that will just put it like literally in your brain. It's because it will just take experimentation. A lot of times though, I will gravitate towards a single microphone that is somewhere around the 12th fret, or where the body meets the neck. One of my favorite microphones is the Mojave Audio it's the MA200. It's a tube microphone, fixed cardioid pattern. and it just kind of, that mic is just sort of, for me, it's just pretty much magic on an acoustic guitar. Not a very expensive mic either. And then I'll do something like a tube compressor. A lot of times I end up using my retro stay level for the acoustic compression. I also mentioned before the sort of the ADR Compex copy. Well, it's not really a copy. It's I think they actually own the design. It's a sort of an updated version of it. But you know, there's a video piece that I did for Universal Audio that demonstrates recording acoustic guitar techniques, and I would defer to that, because you may be able to, because I do talk about two microphone techniques, single microphone techniques, and different genres, and so we also talk about not just mic placement and mic choice, but some of the signal path. So I guess I would defer to that, because I think that that's probably a better example than I'm sort of conjuring up in my mind to answer your question. But so thanks. So yeah, there's a record for the Universal Audio YouTube website. You can find that video.
Great. So then the next question from someone who sent it in, who couldn't attend the call live. He's asking, how did you record drums, especially the snare drum, for tracks like Come On Up to the House and Filipino Box Spring Hog for Tom Waits' New Variations?
Well, those are pretty simple drum recordings. I think it's just kick drum, which would have been an AKG D112, snare drum mic 57, and then I don't remember what the overheads were. That was a lot of overheads ago. But you know, just a stereo pair of overheads in just a big live space. I mean, it wasn't nothing too fancy, not a traditional recording space. So all the signal paths would have been Neve modules. I don't remember the specifics of any compression. We were recording to tape. So when you record to tape, you don't need as much compression because the tape is kind of helping you do some of that control, that color and dynamic control. Yeah, I don't really have much more specifics, but but you know, the description of the microphones, it's all very common, easy stuff. I mean, a lot of it comes down to placement and the player. And you know, I know sometimes the answers to the questions are like not as maybe specific as someone would hope, but it's just so dependent on you know, relationships and making judgment calls in the moment.
Great, cool. So now we'll go on to questions that people have previously submitted, and then we'll return back to live questions as well. So. Sure. So there's a question from Joe, and he's asking, with all of the channel strip emulations available in the box now, what's your thoughts or considerations of using different desk emulations on the same mix? So maybe you're using a Neve emulation as well as an SSL on the same mix, just different instruments. What are your thoughts on?
Definitely do that. Definitely think that that's a good idea. Just to kind of separate the colors a bit and kind of find different you know, sort of places where the some sort of dominant colors and frequencies. I would say though that in general, that has been my philosophy and practice when I was in Pro Tools, but now that I'm in Luna, I pretty much use the API console emulation on everything, and where I look to kind of get that variation in color sometimes is just choosing different tape formulas and speeds for the different instrument groups. Like the drums and bass may be one formula, and that's different than what the vocal or the guitars is doing. But I definitely think it's, you know, an SSL is a bit more aggressive and brighter than a Neve. So it depends on what the source tracks sound like, but definitely definitely love mixing and matching. I mean, it's often that within a mix, I'm using Neve stuff, API stuff, TG, Chandler Abbey Road stuff, Helios modules, the FabFilter Saturn plugin, tape emulation. So I definitely am a firm believer in mixing and matching colors. I think that's more of a modern sound. If you want to go something that's a bit more retro or sort of has a bit of an older feel, then yeah, you'd want to kind of stick to this all of the same thing, because then that is more reflective of the tools that they had available at the time, and the reason that records sound, some of the aspects of the reason they sound the way they do, being older. Yeah.
Great. So then we also got a question from Simon, and he's asking about recording vocals and acoustic guitar. So he's asking, how would you go about mixing an acoustic guitar that's been recorded in stereo, so neck and body mic, for a guitar and vocal only song? So any tips on compression, EQ, and saturation, etc.?
Well, I'm going to assume that the vocal is isolated from the acoustic, because if you're doing a recording of a live vocal, or you're mixing a recording of live vocal and acoustic, you're going to have some acoustic in the vocal mic, and you're going to have a lot of vocal in the acoustic mics, especially when someone sings loud. You can't really separate those things. So makes me think of some other things I should explain, but first I'll try to address this. If they're isolated, much easier. If they're recorded all together, the place to start is with the vocal, just because you're going to hear some of the acoustic in it, is get the vocal sounding, get it started sounding the way you want it to sound. Like, get some EQ on it, get some compression on it, get some reverb, get some, if you want, delay, maybe a little micro pitch shift. Get yourself set up and working on the vocal. And because compressing the voice and kind of controlling and accentuating with those things, it's probably going to bring up some of the acoustic guitar. And then you want to, because the vocal needs to be louder than the acoustic guitar, because that's, typically if someone's sitting and playing in front of you, they're going to be singing louder than they're playing. They're not going to play louder than they're singing. That's just, that's typically the way that it's going to happen. That's a better representation of performance. So you want to, and that's how we try to present music in the recorded medium through speakers. So start with the thing that's going to be the loudest, only that, kind of get that going, and then push the acoustic mics up and kind of figure out, well, where do I have frequency overlap? Do I want these really wide? So it's like we've got the body a little bit more on this side, which is kind of like an exaggerated visual picture of the the instrument and its tonal width. Figure that out. Do I need to add compression or to the acoustic guitar? Maybe only the neck mic needs a little acoustic guitar. They might need different EQs. Maybe there's a little bit of low frequency represented in the body mic, that now that you're compressing and focusing the vocal, that's coming up. So instead of carving it out of the vocal, EQ it out of that microphone. So that, I would still, if they're recorded separately, you still might kind of start a little bit in that way, but maybe you focus on the vocal first, and you have a little bit of acoustic in there. And once you get the vocal sorted out, then you can kind of figure out how the acoustic in isolation fits around that. Something like a really nice trick to use, especially if you have an acoustic guitar that's been recorded with, that's on its own, it's recorded with one mic, and it's solo acoustic and vocal, you're not really going to pan. You might, but you probably typically not going to pan them in something where they're not kind of over top of each other. They're kind of be in the middle, and the ambience that you create is sort of part of how you make it feel wider. You're not really panning things out terribly stereo. You might kind of just slightly pan them left and right just to kind of give it a little bit more width to it. But a micro pitch shift can be put on an acoustic guitar to sort of fill it out and make it feel wider. Sometimes I run acoustic guitar through like a space echo, so I'm getting a little bit of quick delay and a little bit of spring reverb, and that can kind of be positioned off to one side to kind of add a little bit of interest. Yeah, there you go. That's what I can think of.
That was really, really good. And actually, to add on to that, then, because we've actually received quite a few questions on acoustic guitar. So Drew's asking, do you have any tips or tricks for singing guitarists when you're trying to get them to track vocals without playing guitar? Because some singers seem to struggle the minute you take the guitar away and
Yeah.
sing
Oh,
vocals.
well, I guess, is this saying they're performing both at the same time? You're trying to capture both at the same time, or you want them to hold the guitar to record the vocal?
I think this is in the case of maybe someone's like a performing artist and they're used to always singing and playing the guitar.
Uh,
But in this specific case, he's trying to just get a raw vocal and maybe he's already got the guitar track or he's got a backing track, but then they're not used to sort of just singing it.
yeah, well, let them hold the guitar. Wait, there's what before I answer this, I wanted to point out, like in the course, we definitely talk about recording acoustic guitar. There's a lot of good examples, but and I also reference this universal audio video. So you've got something in the course that's going to help you, and certainly, and then the UA video. If there's a lot of questions about acoustic guitar, I think it's a really good piece to check out. In terms of answering the question, I think, oftentimes I'll let somebody, have somebody hold the guitar. Sometimes sometimes an electric guitar is a bit better than an acoustic guitar, just because sometimes you can get like hand noise or just a thump on the body of the guitar. Sometimes it's one's maybe more comfortable to hold than the other if you're standing up. But yeah, let them hold it. Sometimes I'll take like a t-shirt or a tea towel, like a rag, and I'll wrap it around the neck so that they can, like, where the neck meets the body. So it's quieting the strings. And even if they were to strum on it or fret it, it's not really going to make as much noise as it normally would. Yeah, certainly that trick gets used all the time. And just make sure that it's not going to interfere with the recording, and also, like I said, tying something around the neck to dampen the strings, or maybe take the strings off of a guitar if it really just that could be it too.
Great. So now we've got a question from Scott, and he's asking Mac versus PC. And then if your answer is Mac, then what about the Mac Mini and your thoughts on the new M1 chip?
I haven't used a PC for record production in a super long time. I'm just more of a Mac person. I think it's it's the platform it's the majority platform in the business. Companies roll out their Mac versions of stuff way ahead of their PC versions. So it's just, unfortunately, it's not as support. I know it's a more affordable sort of entry point. The product offerings are not as good or as vast, but I understand that, some people are comfortable and that's their preference. That's totally cool. My feelings about, I'm keeping an eye on the new stuff. I still am using a Power Mac, a trash can, like Power Mac from 2013 as my main system. There's some things about it that are not as desirable as I would like, especially the video card being slow compared to what's sort of used now for the way a lot of programs use processing power. But and I think I probably will do a Mac Mini next. I'm just sort of waiting to see. Waiting for the industry to kind of catch up, adoption, and kind of letting other people figure it out. I stopped being the person buying the new latest and greatest a while ago. I'm happy to kind of stick with things that are working as long as I'm not really missing out on some crucial feature, just kind of stay a little bit behind the curve. But I'm kind of torn between, will I do a Mac Mini with the new processor, or will I do an iMac? that really sort of depends on what's the most bang for my buck and what is going to integrate the most easily with my existing hardware versus having to sort of reconfigure and redo more than just the computer. So I'm hopeful. I think before the end of the year, I will have upgraded and changed to some of the M1 processor and what's available now. I just haven't had time to fully do the research and be certain that it's the time right now.
Great. So now we've got a question from Greg, and he's asking, Jacquire, I've had some real challenges recording woodwind instruments, the oboe in particular. So I've tried large diaphragm condenser mics about 3-4 feet away and a ribbon mic, but it always sounds tubby and indistinct. So a friend of mine who makes a living recording in his home studio says that I need a high-end DAW, as well as lots of room treatment, etc. Do you have any advice on how to record woodwind instruments?
Well, I don't necessarily think you need all that other stuff to do it well, as long as you're in a decent, it's like pretty much any furnished living room in someone's home is a pretty good, because there's a couch in there, and there's the furniture for diffusion, a carpet on the floor, maybe some drapes on the window, so it's like that's typically a pretty good environment. I don't know where you're trying to record these things. It's hard to understand. I'm not really sure why you're getting a sort of a tubby sonic picture out of them. It depends on the woodwinds too. Sometimes like a clarinet, you have to get pretty close. I mean, if you're 3 or 4 feet away, it might not be close enough. A lot of, even though a clarinet has a bell, and sound does come out through the end of it, more of the sound is typically projected where the keys are and the fingers are. Saxophone's kind of the same way. You definitely want to catch some of, like, if we're talking about, just like an alto or tenor saxophone, I guess. It's an instrument that's going to definitely project out the horn, but then also there's a lot of, the reed is making sound. There's sound kind of coming out all over the instrument. So if the bell or horn is here, and then the instrument's here, you kind of want to mic not necessarily just on the horn, but kind of split the difference. And you don't want to be so close that it's too isolated on a specific spot, but you don't want to be more than like a few feet away, because then you start to bring in so much more of the room and the ambience. It's a bit curious why you might be getting a dark recording. There might be something wrong with the microphone. If you're only trying to do this with one microphone, see if you can borrow the same model from somebody. Try different microphones. It could be a wiring problem. Could be the preamp that you're using. Maybe you're using, maybe you're just going straight into like a little audio interface. If it's not, if it could be like an inexpensive USB interface, the electronics in those things are just not very good. So it's just going to take a little bit of experimentation. While your friend is making a somewhat valid point, I don't think you have to go spend a bunch of money to have a suitable space to record in. If you have the instrument and you have a means of recording, then do some work to sort of figure out what's not working in the existing setup you have before you go spend money on creating a bigger environment and more complication, a bigger problem. I hope that helps in some way.
Great. So now this question from Dave, and he's asking, if you're staying in the box, what would your order of plugins typically be for a vocal chain?
Well, I guess, is this a mixing question? I guess.
Yeah, this is more mixing. So I'm assuming that he's already recorded the vocal, and then he's trying to figure out what EQs, compressors, or effects to put onto his vocal bus.
Yeah, just typically, I try to, when recording and mixing, I try to EQ the vocal as little as possible. So, but that's not always the case, because maybe something is not maybe the right microphone, or better microphone choice, or just like there's something funky about the signal path, or it's just not really fitting the style of presentation you want to do. So you definitely would need to be more heavy-handed with some EQ. But typically, I'll choose something that, like a Neve. I'll go through some typical, suspects, like a Neve 1073, or like an API EQ, something that has like the ability to do some general EQ, but that also has color to it, and it's going to kind of impart something on the sound. Almost always want to high pass a vocal multiple times, even if it's down at like 30, 50 cycles, just to kind of get rid of all that that content down there, the frequency content down there that's not doing you any favors. It's and it's not necessary for the presentation, especially if it's a vocal that's in a production that has multiple instruments. You want to obviously, well, not maybe not obviously, but you would high pass something less if it's more of a solo, like we were just talking about, solo voice, acoustic and vocal. You probably wouldn't high pass quite as much because you want the vocal to be bigger and more full frequency. But if you're sort of fitting it into a production, you don't really need that low end. So some initial EQ to give it a little bit of color. Maybe you open up the top end a little bit with a 1073. Pultec can be a really good vocal compressor. But in the case of a Pultec, I would use it after compression because it's a much broader, not as specific of an EQ. A lot of times I use the Fab Filter Pro Q3 as my initial EQ because I can do the high passing that I'm talking about, and some subtle adjustments in the spectrum. Maybe there's like some hot spots or deficiencies, and you can address those as needed. But sometimes it's shocking to me how much people like twist an EQ around on a vocal. I think that makes it makes it very difficult to maintain a sturdy sort of phase coherent position in a mix, especially as it translates speaker to speaker. But then once you have some initial sort of fine tuning high pass filter EQ detail, then selecting compressor, and like I was mentioning before, going through 1176 is kind of getting a little bit of control and really reining the dynamic in. Then maybe another compressor. Sometimes two compressors are necessary. One to sort of like an LA2A style compressor to kind of like start to reel it in. And then you need a second one that is maybe a little bit faster, or you can identify some certain dynamics or sort of leftover control that you need to do. I don't typically do two compressors on the track. That's more of an exception, but happens occasionally. So the initial EQ, a compressor, and then you might do something like a Pultec to sort of open the top end up, 12 or 16K broad, like a broad boost, like a broad Q, maybe roll off a little bit more bottom, or maybe you set the bottom end on a Pultec at 100 and you kind of do a little boost and a little cut, because it's interesting the way that the low end on a Pultec, because you have a boost and a cut at the same frequency, and working them against each other can be very interesting in the way that it shapes the detail. And then from there, like I've also mentioned, I'll go a lot of times I'll go to a bus, but then a lot of times I'll use some tape emulation. A lot of times like 15-inch 15 IPS quarter inch is really nice. Like if you're using Universal Audio or in Luna, I like the ATR. But Isotope, there's lots of companies that make really cool tape emulation plugins. And then like I said, I like to use the Sheps Omni channel a lot of times on a bus because of I can get that bus compression. I can get a little bit of grit and distortion with post, like getting the vocal kind of controlled a little bit, some sweetening EQ, the de-essers. If you don't have that and you're using I mean, sometimes I use like an SSL channel or strip instead of the Omni channel because it's got dynamic control, it's got EQ. You got typically the brown and the black sort of selection, which makes the module sound vastly different. If you're not using the Sheps Omni channel, you're going to probably need to put a de-esser in somewhere. I'd put the de-esser after the track compression, but before the bus compression. The FabFilter makes a killer de-esser. And just I'll mention it one more time. It's often good to use at least four times the oversampling resolution there. And then just in terms of vocal treatment, most of the time I do a micro pitch shift. I'll do a short delay, a long delay, a short reverb, and a long reverb. And I send those off of the bus, not the track. So the track gets its treatment, it goes to the bus, and then the bus sends to the effects, and then the effects go to the mix bus. With a vocal, I don't want to collapse the effects into, or I don't want to send from the track to the effects and then all of that go through the bus, because then you're going to get the compression and stuff interacting and controlling some of the effects. So in the case of vocals, I like the effects to be sent off the bus and go straight to the mix. Now drums, it's a little bit different, or guitars perhaps. It's like sometimes I want the delays that are off of guitar to go through the bus, to have the same sort of control, or the drum reverb to go through the drum bus. It's kind of up to your taste and what you're trying to get out of it, and the genre of music also. How dense is the track? What does the production look like? So that's kind of some vocal processing plus. Good question.
Great. And he's just got another question on vocals that maybe you can expand on. So with all that in mind, and how did you get the vocals so large and noiseless on James Bay's Hold Back the River? Was there a doubled or multiple vocals that just can't be discerned in the stereo mix that somehow create that huge effect?
No, well, let's see. Michael Brower mixed that record for me. And I know Michael used the Abbey Road J37 as a tape emulation on that. I recorded James with a Sony C37A, a Neve 1081 module, but without, the EQ engaged, but not EQing other than the high pass. I want to say the vocal compressor was an 1176. I don't recall specifically. It's a single tracked vocal, except when you get to the bridge where there's layered vocals, and there's a big sort of like, that's where the layered sort of background vocals kind of happen. And there is a vocal that's recorded in the chamber that kind of adds character and sort of like a performed reverb aspect to it. Yeah, I mean, that's what I can tell you specifically about that, because I didn't mix it, but I definitely was involved in the mixing and commenting on it and working with Michael on it. Michael does similar things that I do, kind of compressing the compressor. I don't know what all the choices were, but very similar to what I just described in terms of my vocal treatment. Maybe there's some resource online where Michael has talked more specifically about that, but that's what I have for you.
Great. So now we've got a question from Cody, and he's asking, do you have any advice on making a MIDI kick sound more like an analog recording? I'm reverse engineering All I Need by Radiohead as a learning exercise, but I'm struggling to replicate the airiness and punch of their kick drum.
Well, hopefully you're trying a little bit of room space on it, just the tiniest amount, because that would be something that's happening. Try a tape emulation on it too, because you're going to get some color there. Maybe put it through a kind of an amplifier kind of sound, and maybe blend a little bit of that in. Just adding a little bit of distortion, especially to things that like are low, like low frequency centric, like a bass or kick drum, it can just add a little bit of intelligibility. I'm trying to think what else could be helpful for you. Tape emulation, reamp, like some harmonic color, like the Saturn plugin is really good for that. Adding a little bit of ambience, like, maybe an Ocean Way room, or, some sort of Valhalla room, just the tiniest amount, to add that airiness, because you're sort of, that's what I think what you're perhaps articulating, but it's not necessarily like EQ frequency wise. It is actually spatial airiness that you're kind of perceiving, and maybe you are thinking about it, but those are the things I've tried.
Great. So now we've got a question from Drew, and he's asking, he's saying, I've seen you've transitioned to UAD's Luna, and he's transitioned as well. For tracking, their near zero latency seems to still have about 4 ms in terms of latency. So what's your monitoring setup for tracking? And do you still use analog/direct monitoring for nuanced performances like vocal tracking, or do you just do it through Luna?
I don't do anything special. I mean, I kind of, well, it's like, it varies. Some things are kind of a hybrid between my console and using the virtual record paths in Luna. Sometimes it's all in Luna, sometimes it's all analog. There's nothing really special that I do. I think that, yes, there is just a tiny bit of latency, but it's so small that we really, I mean, you can see it, and there's ways that you can reveal it, but like our brains and ears don't really hear it. It's just to me, it's almost inconsequential how much it adds. I mean, if you're using digital converters in and out, I mean, there's latency in those too, so there's no, unless it's an all analog path, there is latency. And you're going to, you're not going to want to combine like live signals and with where you could get into trouble is if you're using some microphones on a source that are going all analog and then just going into the converter and then all sort of virtual, then yeah, you're probably setting yourself up to hear a little bit of comb filtering or to slightly detect the shift. Yeah, I don't, maybe I'm doing it wrong, but there's nothing special that I do beyond that.
Cool. Now, Wolfgang was asking, so he's saying, one of the hardest things for me is to add dimension to the mix and placing things front and back. Do you have a mental picture of real world setups, or do you use a mental picture of real world setups, like imagining a stage or having something similar, or do you have any tips to try and find and achieve the right placements in your mix?
I do visualize. I do visualize a stage or a setting or just the musicians in front of me. I always pan my drums, unless requested otherwise. I always pan my drums like audience perspective. I rarely do things player perspective. Like I'd sort of described before earlier in the conversation that like I try to make the drum picture a little bit narrower. I don't pan overheads out fully wide. I kind of collapse things in. It's like there's a stereo picture, it's just narrower than the stereo field, right? And because then I leave that space for other instrumentation. And then I like to juxtaposition like reverbs and delays. Like let's say if I've got a guitar panned over to the right, the delay that I might put on it, if the guitar is panned all the way to the right, I might put a delay off of it that is sort of at like 10 or 11 o'clock on the other side, and that gives you dimension, don't put, if you've got something panned to the side, don't put reverb if you're sending that sound to an isolated reverb, don't put the reverb just like right in the same spot. Like find a place, because it's like if you think about the way we hear in a space, it's like you might be close to the source, or it might be kind of more on your right side, right, and you're close to it, but it's making sound in the room, and you're going to hear reflections from the room coming back from other places. So it's just kind of like visualizing that concept, visualizing that stage, visualizing that environment, and how to create it. You may also be working with too many stereo sources. A lot of times, samples, patches, they are stereo, but it's a very soft stereo. Either collapse them down to be focused more in one spot, and don't try to have everything filling all the space. Kind of like section things off, sort of front to back, left to right, top to bottom. Top to bottom, I mean frequency wise. That's like, don't be afraid to high pass stuff or like low pass stuff. I mean, sometimes if my cymbals are a little too aggressive, in an overhead capture, I'll take a low pass filter and roll it down. Maybe I'm only rolling it down to like 12K, but I'm getting rid of some. I'll use a moderate slope. I won't use a very steep slope, but I'm getting rid of some of that very, very high end stuff that can be kind of irritating, and sort of taking away, and just kind of like peeling it down to the area where the most articulation and participation is necessary from the cymbals. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I can think of. Give yourself real estate to work, and don't, and try not to put sounds on top of each other. Try to avoid too much sort of what I call stereo that just ended up sounding like diffused mono, really. Try to, like sometimes if a keyboard sound is sort of stereo, but one side sounds a little bit better than the other, I'll just kill the side that doesn't sound as good, and I'll just place it somewhere, and you'll get more out of it by placing it somewhere and then sending it to an effect and placing that somewhere else, so that there's more of a time discrepancy between them, and you're creating dimension that way too.
Cool. JK, it's already been about, I think, slightly more than 90 minutes. So how are you feeling in terms of questions? Do you want to do a few more?
Yeah, let's do a few more. Yeah, let's please do a few more. I probably should wrap it up soon, but time's flying. That's a good sign. But yeah, let's do a handful more.
Okay, cool. So this is a question by Andrew, and he's asking, one, can a good sounding record be achieved just by using cheap hardware channel strip, mixing, mastering, and some recording? So I'm assuming he's got like maybe a less expensive 500 series preamp / EQ, and he's wondering if you can just use that to get a great record, or are there some choices or better use of your money to spend on, say, plugins and to not get hardware gear?
Well, certainly, like, certainly what the Luna and the Universal hardware platform offers is, I mean, it's not cheap, but it's certainly a lot more bang for your buck. It's more comprehensive than piecing hardware together, because like I mentioned earlier, it implies wiring and a patch bay perhaps, and it's not as simple as investing in some modules and a microphone. I guess the danger in having just a very small analog setup and just a few microphones is if you record everything through it, well, then it's all shares kind of a very similar palette of color. And now, while there's nothing wrong with that, and I mentioned before, it can kind of make something sound a little bit more vintage or throwback, it may not be what you're going for. And I think having a variety of stuff, having an analog signal path for maybe the things that are maybe a little bit more important, like vocals or just different things like that. And then when you're getting to multi-miking stuff, that's a pretty big investment in just microphones. Maybe you don't want to have to spend $500 to per preamp to have like 8 preamps. It's like $4,000 to be able to record a drum kit, when you could spend the same money and get like an Apollo, 8XP with some plugins, and then be able to do so much more. I feel like I lost the thread a little bit, Chris. Can you ask me the question again?
It's all right. So, I mean, basically, he was asking, can a good sounding record be achieved
Oh,
either by using cheap hardware?
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Don't let don't and you guys are you're familiar with Graham. Don't and the things that he's shared in the past. Don't you? I mean, that things can be, you can make a great, compelling sounding recording, and that's one of the main focuses of this course is you can make a great and compelling recording with very modest gear. It's really more about understanding the process and the thinking around it, and how to create opportunities and do things differently so that it is compelling. The gear is sort of our conduit, but it's not the art. The gear, it can help you be artistic, but it's not the art. The art is the performance, the song. And that's what people are attracted to. I guarantee you that some of your favorite songs or albums don't really sound that good if you compare them to something that sounds good. The thing that sounds good may not feel very compelling to you, and the thing that doesn't sound as good may feel really compelling to you. So what's the takeaway there? That the performance and the integrity of the capture and the art and the emotion is more important than the quality of its sound, because if it feels good, it will sound good. Just because it sounds good does not make it mean it will feel good. And so that's the thing. So the answer is yeah, absolutely. But you're going to have to be a little even more creative with a limited technical complement to get there, but it's totally possible. And that's one of the main focuses of the course.
Great. And then he's just got a second question onto that where he says, is it worth it to then transfer multiple tracks from DAW to 8-track tape? And then if so, how would you group those tracks and make sure that you're balanced and line correctly? I think you can expand onto that and maybe also answer the question of, do you think that bouncing mixes to tape in this day and age is still worth it in terms of the...
Well, sure. I mean, I've done that a lot in the past, but with the technologies available now, I don't own a tape machine anymore. I sold all my 24 tracks. I sold all my 2 tracks, sold my, it's like hanging on to an Ampex 4-track, a 440 for the longest time. I mean, I'd had that machine forever. But I finally just sold it because it's like the technology's there. Tape is expensive. Tape machines are expensive to maintain. The size, the space requirements. But absolutely, I mean, there's no replacing that sound, but you don't have to do it with analog stuff necessarily. I do think that bouncing things to tape, combining, getting that color and that interaction is very vital. But at the same time, that's why I love Luna so much. I mean, people think I must be crazy how much I talk about it, and do I think some parts of it are a pain in the butt? Absolutely. Are some things not as developed as I wish they were? Yeah. I mean, but it sounds incredible. And so I'm willing to deal with some of the things that are still growing, deficient, and whatnot, because of how good it sounds, how good their plugins sound, how good the tape emulation sounds, the variety of things I can do so affordably. It's not, for me, it's not necessarily about the amount of money that's spent, but I do realize, I do think it is the studio of the future. It's the studio that you can afford, probably. I definitely think it's a very vital part of the process. That's why I love it so much, because I can, as soon as I record a sound in Luna and put it back into playback, I can have tape emulation right away. I can choose a tape format. I can choose a tape speed. I can have one formula on the drums and another formula on the guitars, and another formula on the vocals. And it's all right there. Now, obviously you have to have spent the money that allows you to have the processing power and the interfaces, but it's still way cheaper and way more powerful than, you know, like all this analog gear I have sitting with me. Do I love it? Is it awesome? Absolutely. Do you realize how many tens and tens of thousands of dollars this stuff is? I mean, you can have, for a fraction of the cost, you can have the digital equivalent that, to me, it's no longer it's not a debate. It's like a tape machine is not better unless you really know how to use it. Yeah, because unless it's set up properly and you really know how to manage it, you're way better off using a plugin, because the plugin's going to be, it's not going to need maintenance. Its sound's not going to change over the years. It doesn't need to be recapped, and the alignment's not going to drift. But you still have you basically get the same sonic outcome, and you have all the ability to play with all the same things, but just without all the headache. So yeah, there you go.
Great. So we'll do just two more questions. So
Sure.
this is one from Phil, and he's asking a business question. If you've done a lot of programming on a record, do you ever get a songwriting credit split?
Yeah, sometimes. Sure. But these are discussions to have before, not after. Then these conversations never go well after. Well, not never, but they're rarely. If your role is understood to be contributing as a programmer, then possibly. Now, if you're programming and you're making a track while the song is being written, then you probably are influencing, you know, if you're coming to the table with creative ideas, then yes, you are perhaps influencing the songwriting. If you're simply, you know, performing a function, it's a kind of a clear directive what you need to be doing, maybe it's not songwriting. This is a very gray area. Producing sometimes is songwriting, but that's part of the job, to address things and make the song better so that you have a better record. Doesn't necessarily mean that you deserve songwriting credit. But it's a discussion to have on the front end of things. I mean, musicians come into the studio and get paid to perform and come up with parts. You know, a musician has a profile and a desirable, you know, a profile because they bring something to the table musically. Okay. So you don't want a studio musician to come in that's just like technically great, but then you have to tell them everything that you want them to play. That doesn't make sense. It's like they're there to contribute musically. They don't get songwriting credit. They get paid handsomely to be, you know, a great contributor on their instrument. So it's a gray area. If you feel like you should be entitled to something along the way, try and talk about it in the beginning, not the end. That's the advice on that.
Great. So for the last questions from Chance, and he's asking, what are some of the highlights of your work for Tom Waits' Mule Variations? He's interested in the stories you have with working with Tom, such as the production of the more characteristic sounds of the record. He says, what's he building is a masterpiece, and Take It With Me is actually he and his wife's song. So he's very emotionally attached to this record.
I am too. It's very different recording processes for those two songs. You know, Take It With Me was, I think, was that just Tom, or maybe might have been bass as well, but I'm trying to think. I think it was Larry as well, but just, you know, a kind of a simple recording of Tom at the piano, live vocals. What's He Building is also live vocals, but that, you know, that was almost like Tom was the narrator, and the soundscape was being created around him and then added to later. Can you ask me the first part of the question again? Because stories, but there was also sort of something technical in there too.
He was asking what were the highlights of doing the engineering work for it?
The highlights for me, I mean, being around Tom Waits was incredible. I was and am a fan. So to be able to get to know him personally and interact with him, see how creative and in the moment he is, that he likes to push, you know, he likes to push the boundaries of of sound. It's a marriage between things that are lo-fi and kind of ugly and messy, and things that are hi-fi and very beautiful. It's a combination, a juxtaposition of sounds. Performance, I learned so much about being in the moment and not letting the tech, because Tom wouldn't play a song typically more than 2 or 3 times. And either we had it and it happened, or it wasn't feeling right to him. And if we continued on that same song, he might go from the piano to the guitar. So you really had to be on your toes and ready. That, like I mentioned earlier, it's just like being prepared to move at the speed of creativity. So we had a lot of gear set up, and we're ready for any kind of eventuality, because you just never knew when the instrumentation might change, or how many takes you got at something. And just kind of like willing to kind of go with the flow, and being, I was just really inspired by how much in the moment Tom is when he's performing. I've sort of said this before, but literally when he starts singing and performing, that it feels like the air in the space changes. It's like, it is a very kind of out of body experience in some ways. Yeah, just super special, super great opportunity in my life. I learned a lot, I grew a lot. It was just it was all very inspired and in the moment. Yeah, just a wonderful, wonderful experience.
Amazing. Cool.
We're gonna wrap it up there.
Yeah, I think we'll wrap it up there as a Q&A. Thanks so much, guys, for showing up, for sending in your questions and attending live. Really, really appreciate it. And thanks for being students of Recording Revolution as well as Jacquire's course.
Yeah, I appreciate everyone so much. Thank you. I hope you enjoy the course. I'll be following along and sort of seeing what comments kind of come in. Yeah, I'm grateful. I hope you get everything out of it you want. And just happy recording. Best wishes.
Great. Thank you so much, guys. We'll wrap it up here. And you'll also be able to see the recording in a few days. It will be uploaded to the members area. We'll also have timestamps so that you can jump directly to any questions that you might have missed, or if you attended slightly late, or if you're just watching this. Upload it to the members area. Cool. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.